6 months ago, you would have probably seen my video on my review on Burson Audio Playmate 2. And since then, that particular DAC amp, I am still using it. It has, in fact, become my reference, my favorite. Always, almost perpetually switch on, attached to my PC here, as you can see. And you might be wondering why it is all open up like this. Because today, I'm going to be talking about op amps, upgrade for this Playmate 2. Alright, so before I proceed any further, it is best for me to clarify that, the perspective of sound impression, which I will be explaining to you, alright, mostly done on this Sennheiser HD 600 here. Okay, one of my favorite headphone. And I think it is best that I use this because this is pretty much a very common headphone, 25 years already in the market, and I believe so many people would understand, would know the sort of sound coming from this HD 600, which is something which I would classify as organic neutral sound reference. Also, on top of that, just to get a bit of variety, I also have with me here this Sony MDR 7506. If you are into monitoring, you would already be, very familiar with this 33 years old technology of Sony, which has been used and very well known as well. Okay, now let's talk about the op amp itself. Okay, just like anything in audio, I would just simply would like to, clarify this. I was already very happy with this Playmate 2 as it is, right? Running on stock op amp here, which you can see, which is NE55 series, right? As per described in my review, it is a very well balanced implementation of sound between, being musical and analytical. 3 months after I got my Playmate 2, I have this now with me, which I have been spending quite a bit of time as well, which is the Supreme Op Amp V6 Vivid. The most immediate improvement, as noted here in my notes here, let me just quickly recap. Okay, richer and denser sound texture. Yes, this is what the V6 Vivid offers. I can immediately, hear audible improvement in the way it presents the imaging itself. It is crisper, more well defined, and of course, the separation between instrument and everything became, would you believe it, clearer. But on a side note, I also feel that, there's a bit of hint of coloration. Yes, while generally it become, let's say, still transparent as how it was in stock setting with the NE55 series op amp. But I do feel that the lower mid range, especially when it comes becoming kind of a bit frontal, a bit more intimate, and it gives an impression that there's a, thickness towards the vocal or female, especially even for contralto and soprano. So depending on your preference, it may translate into something which is a bit more pleasing, but it also means that there's a loss of transparency there, just slightly on that particular segment. But otherwise, overall, in the entire dynamic range, I would say that, transparency, resolution, and imaging improve. All right, it is crisper. It is also more better defined. But there's a side effect of that as well. For example, when attached to this relatively brighter sounding MDR 7506, okay, this V6 also introduced a bit more of energy because of that. When you push for more resolution, for more macro detail and micro detail, there's a tendency for, all these things to be a bit more pronounced. The presence is increased. So does the brightness as well. So when you attach to something which is relatively neutral bright like this MDR 7506, I must admit that the energy on the upper frequency, especially from the, pinna region all the way to the treble, becoming a bit more spicy. All right. So if you are sensitive to treble, you might want to consider whether this V6 is suitable for you, because I have a feeling that if you are already using something which is relatively bright, like Beyerdynamic DT series, all right, especially 990, or even this MDR 7, or even this Havaman Sundara here at the back, all right, the brightness might be appearing kind of a bit, too much for some people. Let's talk about the improvement on the physical side of it. You would notice that this V7 comes with this heatsink here, all right? It is also more compact, smaller, and the whole idea behind it is that, from what I can understand, Burson want to have something which is simpler, all right, with shorter circuitry within the design itself. So you would see here that the V6 is markedly taller than this V7 Pro, okay? But The good thing is that, as I touch this, I can feel the heat literally coming from this class A amplifier here. All right, this thing have emit a lot of heat. But what it means is that while this V6 will contain the heat within itself, okay, which means that longevity is a concern. All right, if you are like me, always switching on your DAC amp, leaving it on, switch on your desktop, it could have a long-term effect to the DAC amp itself. Okay, but this one, now that it has heatsink, it will manage the heat better. So when you touch it, you can literally feel the heat being dissipated out. Okay, now let's talk about the sound itself. How does it differ from the V6? And this is how we're going to put it. Okay, whatever that I have mentioned earlier, all right, is retained, okay, because we are talking about op amps which are already operating at the highest level here, okay. Even for the stock NE55 series, the implementation that Burson did was already excellent. I really love it. I would even admit that if I am not comparing between the three of them, I would have been completely happy running on this stock op amp. But, like I mentioned again, I'm going to repeat myself. We are always curious, always wanting to explore more. And these are one of the things that you do. So this V7, what it offers is that it dials back, remember the coloration that I mentioned earlier, right? Brings back the transparency towards the mid-range itself. No, now it does sound richer still, but there's no hint, all right? The temperament of the sound itself, especially when it comes to female vocal, again, contralto or soprano, sounded a bit more natural now rather than enhanced, okay? So if you are looking after transparency, V7 Pro brings back that. Also, because of that, more intimate nature of this V6, okay, this V7 now, because of that, dial down transparency, to achieve that transparency, it also offer a bit more of that open sounding staging, okay. So there's a bit more of openness and the spacing between how the different layer or different instrument are being placed. So kind of like a very welcoming sort of improvement to me. But otherwise, when it comes to macro details, it pretty much remains the same, but it also improved on some of the rendering for the micro detail, especially with small nuances like, tiny chimes, bell, and the decay state of some hi-hat and cymbals. So does it sound brighter now? Okay, since it is also very resolving. I have tested it also with this MDR 7506, and I am happy to say that, it is still kind of a bit, sparkly and more energetic than NE55 series, but not as spicy as V6. So if you are looking for a bit more of balance, retaining the sort of transparency and resolution which was already introduced by this V6, then V7 Pro is definitely the right step